Christmas is about a child, that child in each and every one of us. Transformation is available to all of us if we're willing to become as a child and to see the possibilities of the present moment. In that moment, we're offered a healed past, a new life, and a new future. This Christmas, claim the hope, not just the hope, but the reality of that Christ presence in you that is you. All right, cool. Roderick and Emma and Dawson, all right, that was pretty cool. Well, good morning. Today's the first day of Advent, and Advent is the season in the church calendar that's dedicated to the arrival or the advent of the Christ that we celebrate at Christmas. And the first Sunday is the quality of hope. So what is it that we hope for? Well, we've learned in Unity that we are spiritual beings, that we're one with God, but we don't often live that out day to day, moment to moment. And so our hope is that we remember and acknowledge this truth daily and each moment. You know, I absolutely love Christmas. Doesn't everything look pretty cool up here? Yeah. I love Christmas. It's my favorite holiday, and it always amazes me that there are actually people that don't like Christmas. And even people that like Christmas tend to get really upset in October when the Christmas decorations come out. You know, I used to be one of those people that got upset, and then somebody pointed out that, you know, Christmas is the time of year where we celebrate love and joy and peace. We could celebrate it all year long, but we tend to concentrate it at Christmas. And so the decorations just for me serve as a reminder of what we're celebrating, and I don't mind if the reminders come early. So there you go. Now, I'm a major movie fan. Anybody who knows me knows that. And I love looking at movies and the spirituality in movies and the transformation that happens to characters in the movies. And this morning I wanted to share with you a Christmas story about a man who hated Christmas and a man who had lost hope. You know the story. It's the story of Scrooge. And thank God for those classic traditional stories that not only get us in the mood for Christmas, but serve as a reminder to help us better understand our own self and the human condition. Now, in case you don't know, our own Roderick that's him up there, performs in the Christmas Carol every year at the Zach Theater. Now, if you have not seen it, you need to rush out and get tickets, I tell you. We tried for 3 years. First year, we got all the way in the theater. Somebody came out on stage, said, sorry, we have to cancel the show. One of the cast members has COVID. So we had to go home. The second year, they called us the day before and said, somebody in the cast has COVID, we're canceling the show. This year, we finally made it, and we got to see it, and it was awesome. And he sings that song, Man in the Mirror, in the production as well. So the story of Scrooge is a story of transformation, and it's a wonderful metaphor for the healing, transformative process that's available to all of us. Scrooge represents the walking wounded in us all, that part of us that's sad and fearful and anxious. Those parts of us that keep us from enjoying the full possibilities of all that we can be. That part of us that's lost touch with hope. Charles Dickens said this about Scrooge. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone was Scrooge, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire. Secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. He carried his own low temperature always about him and didn't thaw it 1 degree at Christmas. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, my dear Scrooge, how are you? But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Like most walking wounded, Scrooge had lived his life in a state of isolation and separation. He hid behind a defense system, behind a barrier that he'd built up around him, and he didn't allow anybody else in. And when his nephew tried to wish him a happy holiday, he responded with, "Bah, humbug. What right have you to be merry? You're poor enough." Scrooge had come to depend on something outside of himself, material wealth, to define not only him, but also others around him. He was a wounded and isolated man who wasn't even aware of his own condition. He was what we often call asleep, in that state where we're not aware of our true identity. So Scrooge was living his life asleep, and what happens when we sleep is we dream. And so Scrooge dreams, and a ghost appears to him in the form of his former partner, Jacob Marley. Now, Reverend Sally Taylor wrote this little pamphlet called Spiritual and Psychological Interpretation of a Christmas Carol, which I credit some of the ideas in my talk from. And she said that Marley's ghost represents the activity of divine grace and lets Scrooge know that he has a chance and a hope for transformation. So the ghost metaphysically represents that activity of grace. It doesn't matter how deep we've been asleep or how we've lived our lives, how negative we've been, grace can find us even in the deepest, darkest part of night. And remember, in this story, as in all the stories in the Bible and even in all of your dreams, every single character represents some part of you. And so grace doesn't appear as some outside force. It comes as a message from the deepest part of us, from that kingdom of heaven within us. You know, it might come in the form of some outer experience, maybe an accident or an illness or a conflict. But it's always orchestrated by some part of you that's in agreement with it, and it's designed to wake you up. So I invite you to look at the situations in your own life. What have been the wake-up calls for you? Are there any that are happening now? Be willing to see them as divine grace, pointing the way to self-awareness, healing, and transformation. And so the ghost appears to Scrooge and says to him, "I am here tonight to warn you that you have a chance and a hope, Ebenezer. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Look that for your own sake, you remember what has passed between us." Now, that's a good warning for all of us to heed, because oftentimes we don't pay attention to the message when it comes the first time. It usually requires that we do some inner work. Maybe that's why Jesus said, "Many are called, but few are chosen." And so Scrooge is entering what we would call in spirituality the dark night of the soul. A dark night of the soul experience is something we all go through at some point. We see it mentioned many, many times in the Bible. Job is the epitome of the dark night experience. Jonah, who spent 3 days in the belly of the fish, is a dark night experience. And even Jesus spent 40 days and nights in the wilderness, facing his own inner demons before he started his ministry. So it's a spiritual passage that we all go through, this dark night experience. It's the passage on the way to healing and transformation. It's a good thing. It just doesn't feel like it at the time. And so Scrooge is visited by this first spirit who takes him on a journey to his past. And on this journey, he gets to see where his woundedness happened. He sees himself as a young boy, abandoned at Christmas in a dreary schoolroom. No wonder he hates Christmas. Most of us have been abandoned at some point in our lives, usually by our parents or somebody who loved us. You know, even if it's only momentary, like they went off to work and left you with a babysitter, sometimes we register that as abandonment, and it leaves an imprint on our soul. And we make decisions and choices at that time that will affect our future. And Scrooge had a very, very poor childhood, and his needs didn't get met. And so he made a decision very much like Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, to never be hungry again. Scrooge made a choice to shut off his inner world and instead make the outer world and materialism his source of fulfillment and support. And all of us make decisions early in life, decisions that unconsciously become the laws and rules that run our life. Maybe we felt powerless as a child, and so we learned to be powerful. And we used that power sometimes to manipulate others. Or maybe we learned to be helpful. And we became so helpful that we denied our own needs and became codependent. Or maybe we decided that what we do determines who we are, and we became workaholics, always striving to do more. We all have our own survival techniques. Hopefully you're in touch with what yours are. And so Scrooge had his. And the process of waking up gives us an opportunity to look at the unconscious patterns and see if they are really serving us. Transformation can begin with shedding light on our past. To see what happened to you, or the decisions that you made about what happened to you, and then be able to do something about them. Now, each time the Spirit shows Scrooge something from his past, he finds himself wanting to respond differently. He sees himself as that boy in the schoolroom, and he's reminded of the little boy who came and sang Christmas carols to him the night before, and he wishes he had given him something. He wishes he had treated his nephew kinder. So the transformation is beginning. Transformation happens when we look at our life and begin to see what hasn't worked, and we want it to be different. And again, how that happens will be different for everyone. Some of us have to hit bottom before we feel that impetus to change. Some of us will have a spiritual experience, kind of like a spirit appearing to us in the middle of the night. Maybe we'll read something in a book, or we'll hear a talk, and something clicks for us, and we feel some urge within us to make a change. That process of transformation has begun. By the time the second spirit appears to Scrooge, he'd already experienced a significant change in his mind and heart. And this time he greeted the spirit with, "Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it." So Scrooge begins to see hope for himself. He's become teachable. And don't you know what that's like? Sometimes when the lessons first come in life, they really feel difficult, usually because we're in resistance to them. And so life sometimes has to hit us over the head to get our attention. And yet when we open ourselves up to be teachable, the lessons can come more gently. They'll still come, they might still hurt, but they don't devastate us because we're more willing to see what is ours to see. So what the second spirit does is it shows Scrooge the possibilities of the present. He shows him his nephew and his family. And even though they're very poor, Scrooge sees how happy they are. And he sees his employees, and he hears how they talk about him, and how there's this darkness that comes over this face whenever his name comes up in conversation. And yet, they still take the time to offer Scrooge a toast. Scrooge begins to have hope, and he sees that possibility of love and friendship. He's no longer afraid of it. When we let go of the pain of our past, whether it's the past of our childhood, or sometimes it's just the past of a few minutes ago, like, why did I do that? Or why did I say that? Or why did they do that? When we're able to let go of that past, we begin to see the possibilities that await us in the present. And so the last spirit comes, the ghost of Christmas yet to come, and Scrooge says these words, "Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen. But as I know your purpose is to do me good, and as I hope to live to be another man from what I was, I'm prepared to bear your company, and I do it with a grateful heart. Now, if you remember, what happens is the future he sees is pretty horrible. And I remember the first time I saw A Christmas Carol, I thought it was kind of strange that Scrooge seemed like he was already transformed, and yet he still had to see this awful, horrendous future. Why? Well, he had set that future in motion, and he had to see it. And if you remember, he sees his own death. He sees how they sell the linen from his bed. They take the shirt off his back. Nobody is sad that he died. In fact, people are rejoicing because they won't lose everything they have. And so the reason he had to see that future that he'd set into motion is because he had set it into motion. And although Scrooge felt changed, change for him wouldn't happen all at once. He needed to realize that a part of him, the part of him that was self-centered, had to die. And that's why he had to witness his own funeral and see the gravestone with his name on it. Transformation happens first when we see the need for change. Something happens that begins to wake us up. Doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes it's a conflict or hitting bottom. Maybe it's just a feeling of unrest or uneasiness. We look at our past behavior, we see what hasn't worked, and then we get a glimpse of the possibilities of the present moment. We hear a talk, we read a book, we take a class, we get this aha, and we begin to see the possibility for change and transformation. But then in order for that change to take place, we have to die to our old way of being. We have to die to our old beliefs that have kept us stuck and limited. We have to fully realize the impact of our life's choices and the future that they would bring. So wanting to change and actually changing are not the same. Scrooge had a realization, and it awakened in him a desire to be different. But he had to do more than want it. In order to actually make that shift, he had to choose it. And in that choosing, there's a death that takes place. Paul in the New Testament was someone who went through major radical transformation. If you remember the character of Paul, he was killing and persecuting Christians. And then one day on the road, Jesus appeared to him. And he fell off his horse and he was blinded for 3 days. He was blind to the ways of the world, and when you're blind, you have no outer distractions, and so he was forced to go inside and do inner work. And his life was transformed. He changed and began preaching the very gospel that he'd been fighting against. You see, Paul had been very sincere in what he did. He had strong religious beliefs, and he persecuted Christians out of those beliefs, misguided as they were. Sometimes our motivations are motivated by false beliefs, our behaviors. Scrooge had adopted a belief early in his childhood that in order to survive, he had to accumulate wealth. And he needed to protect himself. So he built up walls around himself. He didn't allow love to enter. Paul thought what he was doing was serving God. Both of them, Paul and Scrooge, were in error. But there must have been an opening in them, somewhere deep inside of them, that was willing to transform. And that's all God needs, is a willingness. Jesus said we must become as a little child if we are to enter the kingdom. That's what transformation is about, finding that kingdom of heaven that is within us, finding that true identity, which is the Christ. And we do that by being willing to become as a child, by being open and resilient and willing to transform. And that's why Christmas is about a child, to remind us that transformation is available if we're willing to be that child. A child is teachable. A child is pure. A child is giving and loving. So Scrooge came out of that dark night experience, and he was a new person. And the first thing he wanted to do was to make amends. He had found something pure and unblemished within him. He had found that kingdom of God within himself. He'd become childlike again, a child without wounds, a child that was filled with love and joy. And in that consciousness, he was able to go around joyfully giving gifts to everyone. Christmas is about a child, that child in each and every one of us. Transformation is available to all of us if we're willing to become as a child and to see the possibilities of the present moment. In that moment, we're offered a healed past, a new life, and a new future. This Christmas, claim the hope, not just the hope, but the reality of that Christ presence in you that is you. God bless you.
Divine love, through me, blesses and multiplies all that I am, all that I have, all that I circulate, and I am grateful.